It is now. All right, it's now 6 p.m., so we're going to get started. We'd like to welcome everyone to this evening's community meeting, which is focused on housing needs as part of the city's update to the housing element for the period 2022 to 2030. My name is Sherry Morgado. I'm the Community Development Manager for Housing Tools. Housing Tools is the city's consultant for the update to this 2022-2013 housing element. I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, Jess Candela, who is going to cover some of the technical instructions regarding tonight's meeting.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. My name is Jess Candela, and I'll be providing some technical support instructions for this evening's community meeting. If you'd like to hear live Spanish interpretation, please follow along. So first, you'll click Interpretation. The interpretation icon that you see here can be found at the bottom of your screen. Then you'll click Spanish. Then we recommend that you click Mute Original Audio to hear Beatriz, our interpreter, more clearly. This will mute the audio in English and provide the Spanish interpretation only. Next slide. You may download a PDF of the slides in either English or Spanish by visiting our website at www.chicohousingelement.com/resources. Again, that's www.chicohousingelement.com/resources. In the top right corner of the website, you may select your language, either English or Spanish, and download the slides in that language. Next slide. If you are deaf or hard of hearing or would prefer to read closed captions, we have enabled Zoom's live transcript feature. To view the closed captions, first you'll click Live Transcript at the bottom of your screen, then you'll click the caret and select Show Subtitle. Instead, if you would like to hide the closed captions, you'll click Live Transcript at the bottom of your screen, click the caret, and then select Hide Subtitle. Next slide. We have 3 interactive features for the meeting tonight. First, we will have 4 polls. Sherry will read the question and your answer choices aloud, and then you'll select your answer on the screen. Make sure you click the button at the bottom of the poll that reads Submit Poll. Polls are anonymous and results will be shared live. Next is the chat. You'll see that you can't type in the chat. We've reserved this space for us to send out technical support help as well as share links for you to learn more information about the housing element. Finally is the Q&A. If you have technical difficulties and need support, please send us a question via the Q&A feature. You may also type questions into the Q&A that you'd like for us to answer at the end of the webinar. If we don't have time to get to all the questions, we will post a document on our website, www.chicohousingelement.com, by next Friday, February 19th, along with the recording of the webinar in both English and Spanish. If you are joining us via calling in on a phone and have the ability to join via the web, we recommend that you do so. The polls, the chat, and the Q&A features can only be used via the web. If you have a personal computer, a laptop, a tablet, or a smartphone and have a Zoom account, you can enter the meeting ID for this meeting to join via the web. The meeting ID is 878-1088-0235. Again, that's 878-1088-0235. Next slide.
All right, I'm going to go over the conduct rules for tonight's community meeting, and this includes both the webinar that we're in right now and then the meeting and breakout groups that will begin at 7 p.m. All input provided this evening is to be provided in the spirit of furthering an understanding of housing needs in Chico. All communication, whether verbal or in writing, must be polite and respectful of others. Any violations of these rules will be cause for action by the facilitators, including turning off microphones or expulsion from the meeting. Before we proceed into the presentation, this evening, I'd like to touch upon what we'll be discussing tonight specifically and what we will not be discussing. In light of the understanding that there is currently a fervent community concern and discussion about unsheltered homelessness. The housing element's purpose is to create conditions and policies that facilitate the production of housing for the entire community. This does include permanent housing solutions for those experiencing homelessness, but within a framework of long-term vision and solutions so that we can plan for adequate, affordable housing for all members of the community. The housing element update process is not the place where we are discussing the immediate conditions and needs for moving people into shelter or the larger impacts that result from unsheltered homelessness. For those seeking to engage in the current conversation and decision-making processes about unsheltered homelessness, there are a number of appropriate venues to do so. First, you may follow and participate in the City Council meetings when the city's Homeless Solutions Coordinator and the Council have this topic agendized. Secondly, the Greater Chico Homeless Task Force meets monthly, and the current agenda may be found on the city's housing webpage. And third, you may follow the meetings of the Butte County-wide Homeless Continuum of Care. So we're now going to launch our first poll. So our question for this first poll is, how did you hear about this event? And we'd like you then to select from the choices. It looks like everybody's participating. You can see it City of Chico Facebook, City of Chico Instagram, City of Chico Twitter, the website chicohousingelement.com, local organizations, newspaper or news station, and other.
So just about 3/4 of you have responded, so I'm going to leave it open for about 10 more seconds. Okay, last call for submitting your response. Make sure you hit submit poll at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to end the polling and share the results. 23% of folks heard about this event through the City of Chico Facebook, 5% through City of Chico Instagram, 10% through our website, chicohousingelement.com, 29% through local organizations, 3% through the newspaper or news station, and 31% other. Thank you for sharing your responses.
All right, now we're going to move into this evening's agenda. So we're going to begin with an overview of the housing element in terms of its purpose and some of the legislative background. Then we'll go through an update on the 2014 housing element progress. We're going to talk about the context for the development and update to the housing element in terms of housing needs, the housing market, and funding. And then after that, we're going to be taking a break. And then we're going to go into another meeting, which we'll discuss again at the end of this webinar, where we will review the current goals in the housing element in the context of housing needs in the community. And we'll be discussing this in breakout groups. Then we'll reconvene to review the group's input. And before we conclude this evening, we'll talk about the timeline and the next community meeting. So I'm going to go into the housing element overview now. So in terms of the purpose of the housing element, it establishes the city's priorities for housing its citizens in 8-year planning cycles. It sets goals for the allocation of funding, program coordination, and zoning efforts to support the production of housing. And it is one of the mandated elements of the city's general plan and must be consistent with the general plan, which has a 15 to 20-year timeframe. In terms of the state's role in oversight of the development of the housing element, The development and implementation statewide of housing element law is administered by the State Department of Housing and Community Development, who we often refer to as HCD. HCD approval of each jurisdiction's housing element provides access to state funding. Since 2014, which was the last time that the housing element was updated, the state has amended the housing element law through numerous bills which place additional responsibility on local jurisdictions to adequately plan for and facilitate the production of housing while removing as many constraints as possible. These are the mandated topics which must be addressed in each jurisdiction's housing element. First of all, it's very important that the entire community is invited to participate in the process of the development of the housing element, and this is documented in the housing element document itself. Another item which must be addressed is reviewing the previous housing element and documenting the progress that the city has made on the goals and policies and actions that were established in that previous housing element. It must have an up-to-date housing needs assessment, must provide an inventory of adequate sites which are available within the city to accommodate through proper zoning the regional housing needs allocation, which has been provided to the city by our local council of governments. And we're going to talk about what that is in more detail in just a minute. It must also include an inventory of financial resources that are available to the city to carry out the housing program, which is established in the housing element. It must analyze both governmental and non-governmental constraints to the development of housing. A new requirement is that it must do an analysis and assessment of fair housing opportunities and obstacles for marginalized communities. And then finally, it must include a housing program which establishes a series of goals, objectives, and actions that will be undertaken in the 8-year planning cycle to address the housing needs, address the constraints, and address any impediments to fair housing. I wanted to talk briefly about the planning cycle since we're going to be discussing that this evening in particular. So the existing and soon to be expiring housing element covered the period 2014 to 2021. The new housing element update period is for the period 2022 to 2030. So when you hear us refer to the 2014 housing element, that's what we're referring to. We're referring to the one that exists but is soon going to expire. So I wanted to talk now about the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, which is sometimes referred to as RHNA. The foundation of the housing element process is determining the amount of housing that must be planned for, segmented by income levels. And the way this is done is through a partnership between the state HCD and each regional planning organization throughout the state. In Butte County, this is BCAG, or the Butte County Association of Governments. Using demographic data from a variety of sources, both HCD and BCAG each arrive at their own assessment of what the housing needs in the county are. BCAG then coordinates with HCD, taking into account factors that might not be captured in the standard calculations that the state has established, to arrive at a final figure. This final figure is the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. BCAG is then responsible for divvying up or allocating this total housing need between the cities and the county. And BCAG does this in a Regional Housing Needs Allocation Plan. Now we're going to launch our second poll. So, oops, that looks like our first poll, Jess.
It shows as question 1, but it actually is our second poll.
I'm
sorry about Sherry.
I'm sorry, I was just reading the number. So the question is, have you participated in previous housing elements? And your choices are yes, no, or unsure.
Okay, it looks like just about 80% of folks have responded, so I'll leave it open for about 5 more seconds. Just as a reminder, you're going to select your answer choice and then hit Submit Poll at the bottom right corner of your screen. Okay, I'm going to end the polling and share the results. So 19% said yes, they have participated in previous housing elements, 76% said no, and 4% were unsure.
Right, thank you. And just as a reminder, as we're proceeding through this evening's presentation, this first part of the evening, if you have any questions that you would like us to address at the end of the webinar, please type those in the Q&A box. All right, now we're going to talk about progress that the city has made in the current housing element for the period 2014 to 2021. So these were the big picture broad goals that were established in the 2014 to 2021 housing element. To increase equal housing opportunities, provide housing that is affordable to low incomes, promote construction of a wide range of housing types, encourage the creation of housing for persons with special needs, improve, rehabilitate, and revitalize existing neighborhoods, increase home ownership, and encourage energy efficiency in housing. This evening, as we move into the breakout groups, we're going to be using these broad goals and the actions, some of the actions that were established under these goals to help us guide the conversation about housing needs. But for the update to the housing element, we're in no way restricted to these goals as we move through the conversation. So I want to talk about the RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, for the current housing element, the 2014 through 2021, and production numbers through December 2019. So as I mentioned when I was explaining the RHNA allocation, when this is done, it is segmented by income levels, which you can see here in this chart. The far left column is the affordability tier. So we have very low income, moderate income, and above moderate income. What you'll be able to see from looking at this table that there was a RHNA allocation. So basically what happened is the state and BCAG determined that in order to meet the needs that were projected for the city of Chico at that time, there needed to be produced a total of 3,963 housing units broken up by these income segments. So in other words, these housing units needed to be produced at costs that would be affordable to individuals and households at those income levels. Then you can see in the production numbers what has actually happened through December 2019. And one thing that you'll be able to note is that in terms of the affordability tiers, the only place where the mark was achieved and actually exceeded was in the above moderate income category, with 166.3% of the allocation actually produced. Where the numbers were incredibly low was in the very low income and low income. And one of the things that we'll be talking about as we move through the housing element process is that oftentimes the private market is adequately able to meet the needs of above moderate income households. But for very low, and sometimes also for moderate income households, the private market really isn't able to do that. So that is where housing subsidies and a variety of housing programs come into play. One of the things that happened in 2012 was that then Governor Brown and the state legislature eliminated redevelopment agencies in California. And for redevelopment agencies and for the city of Chico's redevelopment agency, a certain percentage, 20% of all of the RDA revenue was dedicated to the development of affordable housing for low income households. With that funding source completely eliminated, there was a significant impact to the ability to produce subsidized affordable housing in Chico with the loss of that revenue and that funding source. So that is definitely one of the key reasons why you're seeing such a dramatic difference in terms of the RENA allocation and the numbers that were able to be produced. And then we wanted to go over some of the other goals that had been established in the housing element in terms of some numerical goals and what was achieved. So we just talked about the actual production of extremely low, very low, and low income affordable units that were produced through December 2019. And those were 14 rental units and 9 home ownership units. The good news is that there is some significant production that is planned, both from the range of extremely low to low income affordable units that are in process, and there are 740 of those. Those units are largely attributable to some special tax credits through the low income housing tax credit program that is being made available to respond to the housing crisis that was exacerbated by the Camp Fire. So these are some disaster focused low-income housing tax credits. So it's anticipated that these 740 units will begin to start construction and be placed in service over the next 2 to 3 years. There were 121 transitional housing beds developed for people experiencing homelessness. And then there were 194 supportive housing units developed or secured for people experiencing homelessness. Some of these were done through master lease programs that are operated by local nonprofits. There were 149 households assisted with homeless prevention rental assistance, and that was through June of 2020. And then 77 low-income households assisted with city sewer connection assistance, also through June of 2020. All right, we're going to launch poll number 3 now. Poll number 3. Which housing issues are you the most interested in? Please select all that apply. Accessible housing for people with disabilities, accessory dwelling units known as ADUs, affordable housing, market rate housing, multifamily housing, permanent supportive housing, single family housing, or other.
So it looks like just about a quarter of you have responded. This is a little bit of a longer one, so I'll leave it open for about 20 more seconds. Okay. Just a reminder to make sure you hit submit poll at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to end the polling and share the results. Our most popular answer was affordable housing with 84%. We had accessible housing for people with disabilities getting 41%, accessory dwelling units, also known as ADUs, at 35%, market rate housing at 12%, multifamily housing at 45%, permanent supportive housing at 54%, single family housing at 29%, and 16% at other. And those percents equal more than 100 because you can select multiple answers. Thanks so much for providing your answers.
All right, now we're going to provide some context for the discussion in terms of housing needs, market, and funding. So now we're going to talk about the regional housing needs allocation, which has been established for this housing element update for the period 2022 to 2030. So you can see again the breakout here as you saw on the previous chart. And one thing that I wanted to note here is that there's been an overall decrease when you look at the total of 475 units compared to the previous cycle for the housing element. That decrease has really been in the above moderate income category. which was a decrease of 529 units. And then there was a slight increase in the others, but still the other income categories, resulting in a net decrease of 475 units. So we wanted to go over a few notable items as we've been working on the housing needs assessment that's going to be fully explained in the written report that we produced, but there were some things that we pulled out that we thought were important to note. First of all is population growth for the city of Chico from 2016 to 2020. Certainly, we know that due to the devastating impacts from the Camp Fire, Chico did see a sizable increase in its population immediately after the Camp Fire and in some of the months that followed that. As you can see from the table here, you will notice obviously where the big jump was from 2018 into 2019, and then a slight increase continuing into 2020. Also notably for the county overall, the county has lost somewhat of its population, likely due to people who did have to move elsewhere who were displaced by the fire or the other, a number of fires that we have had, and they have moved out of the county. So there is an ongoing, definitely an ongoing population increase for Chico. In terms of age, this has been true for Chico for a number of years. The Chico population is much younger than the statewide average. Almost a third of the population is within the age bracket 20 to 34 years old. Chico's median age is 29.7, while the statewide median is 36.5, and the national median age is 38.1. As we mentioned earlier, there's been a significant increase in Chico's population, and during the decade between 2010 to 2020, it actually increased by 28.4%. Of course, a lot of that happened in 2018 and 2019, but the number of housing units has only increased by 12.7%. Also, when we compare the city of Chico to the state of California in terms of households by tenure, whether they're renter occupied units or owner occupied units, the numbers you see here have also been true for Chico for quite a few years, where Chico actually has 55.3% of housing units occupied by renters and 44.7% that are owner occupied housing units, and almost the reverse is true for the state of California overall. So we certainly know that the student population impacts this tremendously, and this has not changed over the last few years, and certainly did not change with even the impacts of the Camp Fire, where certainly right now the vast majority of Chico households are renter occupied households. Looking at the unmet need in subsidized housing units and renter cost burden. When you look at this bar graph that we have presented here, you can see that we have some criteria that we were looking at, such as the number of households earning less than $25,000 per year, those that are paying more than 35% of their income to rent, and those paying more than 50% of income to rent. And any household that is paying more than a third of its monthly income toward housing costs is considered cost burdened by their housing costs. In addition to that, as we looked at the number of subsidized housing units, which is 2,691, you can see in comparison to the number of low-income households that there's an unmet need of 6,867 rental units. And considering how many of these households are cost burdened is really important, because households who are cost burdened by their housing costs will not then have the disposable income that they need for other necessities of living, such as food and medication, education, clothing, and that type of thing. We also looked at the average asking rent for all rentals for the last 4 years. And you can see that it has steadily increased since 2017. And certainly we know that there were increases that were happening certainly all along the way. And then when the campfire happened, there were additional increases, although there were measures put in place to ensure that rents did not unduly increase. One thing that we did note is starting in 2020, quarterly rents, because what we looked at is we looked at the first 3 quarters of 2020 that we have data for. Quarterly rents did begin to trend downward from 2019. So even though the number that is shown here for 2020 is slightly higher than 2019, that's because this is an average, and the first quarter of 2020 was still quite high. So it's making the average higher, but the rents did begin to come down due to COVID-19. So you can see the asking percentage change from the previous year. There's been that steady increase in the average asking rent in Chico. In terms of market trends with home ownership, the median home sale price in Chico increased from $283,500 in 2015 to $410,000 in 2020, which is an increase of 45% and an average annual increase of 9%. For this period of 2015 to 2020, the number of short sales and real estate owned properties did steadily decrease, and that likely reflects the housing market recovery that happened after the 2008 Great Recession. However, this trend has started to very slowly reverse in 2020 with some foreclosures, and this is likely due to the economic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. So now we're going to talk a little bit about federal, state, and local funding in terms of resources that might be made available to the city and or the city's development partners as they pursue the housing program that's ultimately established in the housing element. So first of all, I want to talk about CDBG-DR. This stands for Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery. These are funds that are being allocated to the state of California by the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development. The multifamily housing program will allow local governments like Chico to identify, select, and submit potential projects to the state for eligibility and compliance review, approval, and funding. In addition, the city is an entitlement grantee for CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, and a participating jurisdiction in the Home Investment Partnership Program. So these are block grant programs that the city's been participating in for a number of years that provide very necessary funding that can help support the development of new housing, either through the development of infrastructure or, in the case of the home funds, funding for the housing development itself. In addition to that, with the new Biden administration, the likely direction will be to increase funding for subsidized housing, rental assistance through the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and homeless assistance programs, although specific details are not yet known. In terms of state funding, the newest funding source that will be made available to the city is the Permanent Local Housing Allocation, known as PLHA. This is a new annual funding source for local jurisdictions, which is funded by real estate transaction recording fees. And these funds are provided in 5-year planning cycles. Chico's estimated 5-year allocation for the first cycle is $2.3 million. There are a variety of eligible activities that PLHA can be expended for, but they're all related to ensuring that the needs of households that earn 60% of area median income or less are being identified and funding directed towards those. And in addition to that, that PLHA is being used to help further the goals in the city's housing element. I had also earlier mentioned disaster low-income housing tax credits. The state also has a program called the Infill Infrastructure Grant Program, which can assist for those parcels that would be suitable for the development of affordable housing, but have a lack of infrastructure that's available at those parcels right now. In addition, something that's proposed in the governor's budget, certainly not yet final, would be augmented funding for the low-income housing tax credit program that is operated by the state, and continued funding for project home key acquisitions, which can provide permanent supportive housing for individuals who have experienced homelessness. In terms of local funding, I had mentioned that in 2012, the governor and legislature had eliminated redevelopment agencies and the previous low mod income housing fund. So this was, again, as I mentioned, the primary source of local funding for affordable housing. It has not been replaced with a funding source that provides similar levels of funding. Even the new PLHA program does not provide nearly the same amount of money. There are modest repayments that are made on these long-term loans from the redevelopment agency. It's now called the Affordable Housing Fund. But it does take several years to accumulate enough funding from those loan repayments to then loan out again for projects. In addition, a number of years ago, the city worked very diligently to establish the North Valley Housing Trust, and that spun off as its own nonprofit. The trust was able to fund one housing project, but since then has been unable to secure the necessary donations from the local community that really make a housing trust fund successful, and will need the participation of multiple Butte County jurisdictions and the private sector to remain viable. All right, we'll launch our fourth poll now. Fourth poll, where would you like the city of Chico to concentrate its efforts? On first-time homebuyer programs, housing for people experiencing homelessness, infill development, multifamily affordable housing, multifamily market rate housing, rehabilitation and preservation of existing housing, single-family affordable housing, single-family market rate housing, student housing, and other.
Just about half of you have responded, so I'll leave the poll open for about 10 more seconds. Okay, I'm going to end the polling and share the results. 3% chose first-time homebuyer programs, 43% chose housing for people experiencing homelessness, 10% chose infill development, 20% chose multifamily affordable housing, 3% multifamily market rate housing, 0% rehabilitation and preservation of existing housing, 13% single-family affordable housing, 6% single-family market rate housing, 0% student housing, and 1% other.
All right, now we're going to talk about moving into our breakout groups. So after we finish our instructions here, we're going to take a 15-minute comfort break. We'll be leaving this webinar completely, and we're going to ask everyone to join the meeting right before 7 p.m. using the link for the breakout groups meeting. And I'll repeat what that link is. Everyone is going to be starting together in the same meeting room, and then you will be randomly assigned a breakout group with a facilitator and a note taker. One breakout group will have live Spanish interpretation. Please send us a private chat message in the next meeting if you would like to be placed in that group. And when we open up the meeting, Jess is going to provide specific instructions and a poll on how to do that. So for the breakout groups, the Zoom meeting ID is 840-8139-0913. If you need to call in via phone, it's the same phone number that you were using for this webinar. It is 1-669-900-9128. And again, I'll repeat the Zoom meeting ID for the breakout group meeting. It is 840-8139-0913. So we'd like to ask everyone to join that meeting right before 7 p.m. Because we want to start promptly at 7. We have a lot of material for the breakout groups to cover, and we want to give you all the time necessary to ensure you can have the conversation about housing needs in Chico.
So Sherry, we have about 5 more minutes. Did you want to take a question or two?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Great. So we have a question from Blake, and Blake asks, does that housing need calculation include risk? I'm thinking specifically of the high likelihood and risk of future catastrophic wildfires impacting our area and exacerbating need.
That's a really good question, Blake. I think what we should do, and we'd be happy to add this to the Housing Element website, and when we post these FAQs, we'll give you the directions on how to access the Regional Housing Needs Allocation Plan that was developed by BCAG, so that you can look at their methodology, because I think their document explains it far better than I could. So that's a really good question. We'll make sure we give you the link to that document.
Great. And our next question comes from John, and John asks, what are the actual income levels? And he was asking about the RENA extremely low income, very low income from slide 18, Sherry.
Yeah, so extremely low income is 30% or less of area median income. And then very low income is 50% or less. One of the things we're also going to be adding to the website, I wanted to, since we've got a few minutes, I'll plug the website. If you haven't been there yet, chicohousingelement.com. We're going to be adding a number of fact sheets to the resources tab, the resources page that's on that website. And one of the things we'll be posting is an income chart breakdown so that you can see exactly what those 30%, 50%, 80% equate to in real numbers in terms of area median income by household size.
Great, thank you. We have another question. Does the state have a plan to replace RDA funds?
Not at this time, no. The permanent local housing allocation was somewhat of an attempt on their part, in the sense that it is supposed to be, as it says in the title, permanent. They were able to establish through the passage of SB2 that additional transaction recording fee for real estate transactions. So this funding is intended to be ongoing annual funding for local jurisdictions, but is certainly, with the revenue estimates that they have, it can't compare to RDA, what that was able to provide. So there is not a comparable replacement at this time.
Okay, and I think we'll take one more question. This is from Rob, and Rob asks, how does the Butte County decrease figure into the Chico increase? And I believe Rob was asking about that population growth slide. Is the net reduction in Butte County offset by growth in Chico?
Well, I would certainly say that in terms of the impacts to Chico's housing market, which is certainly the concern that everyone participating in this meeting, what we're all concerned about is how it has impacted Chico's housing market, which, you know, from a rental perspective, already had an extremely low vacancy rate. Typically vacancy rate, you know, for a while, certainly under 2%, for a number of years under 1%, and then it dropped to 0. And actually, if we had the possibility of a negative, it could have been negative. So I think that as all of the jurisdictions in Butte County right now are working on their housing element updates, you know, I think there's certainly an opportunity for everyone to be talking about, and certainly some of this has already happened through the RENA allocation process, but certainly an opportunity to talk about and look at what this means for Butte County's future, for Chico's future, in terms of what's going to happen with the population. You know, there's still so much that we don't know about what happens long term after some disasters and the choices that people might have to make in terms of where they live. So some things are still yet to be revealed, but I'm sure that those conversations and that planning is, you know, is starting to happen more at the county level as well, to talk about this impact and what it might mean for the county overall in the future.
Great, thank you, Sherry. I've just put back in the chat the link to join the next session. So like Sherry said, we're gonna be taking a 15-minute break and restarting at 7 o'clock in this new Zoom meeting. So that Zoom meeting ID is 840-8139-0913. And I'll repeat that one more time. The Zoom meeting ID is 840-8139-0913. I'm going to leave this webinar open for a few minutes if you need to copy and paste that link. I'll also put a link in the chat to a survey that has just launched that will be available from today, February 10th through March 10th. So I'll add that into the chat and we'll reconvene at 7 o'clock. Thank you.